Hello and welcome to our new video. In this video series we are talking about non-destructive examination, the requirements of ASME section 5. As always, this video series is applicable for people who are preparing for API ICP examinations and also who are preparing for ASNT NDT level 3 examination, either the general examination or they are going in for one of the method examinations. In today's video, we are going to talk about Article 10 of ASME Section 5, that is leak testing. Now, leak testing is a very peculiar testing method. It is not generally used on most of the components, but in some cases where you have any evidence of leak, or if you want to have any vacuum systems where a leak is not permitted so that atmospheric air cannot get inside the system, then you have to do leak detection. In some cases where you are holding some kind of liquid and if you don't want that liquid to come out of it, then you would generally do leak detection. Now, leak detection testing can look very complex because this testing method have multiple techniques associated with it. You can have a simpler form of leak detection technique that is known as bubble leak test. You have bubble leak test. Another variation of that bubble leak test is going to be vacuum box testing. You can also have helium mass spectrometer testing. You can have halogen tracer gas testing. You can have pressure change test measurements. So all of these requirements are given in Article 10. Article 10 would also have multiple appendixes, but all of those appendixes are not generally that much required for API ICP examination. But again, they are a good read if you want to understand about leak detection. So again, the scope, the article describes the method and requirement and for the performance of leak testing. You have various mandatory appendix. You have mandatory appendix 1, that is bubble leak test, mandatory appendix 2, that is bubble leak test or vacuum box test. You have appendix 3, that is halogen diode detector. You have appendix 4, that is helium mass spectrometer testing with the help of a detector probe. Appendix 5 is helium mass spectrometer with tracer probe. You have 6 mandatory appendix, that is pressure change test. 8 is thermal conductivity detector probe test. 9 is helium mass spectrometer, the hood technique. You can have ultrasonic leak detector techniques. You have helium mass spectrometer testing, helium filled container leak detection test rate, and non-mandatory appendix also. So multiple appendixes are involved. But if you are studying for API ICP examination, only the initial article is required and just 1 or 2 appendixes are required that are containing simply the bubble leak test or a vacuum box test. The same thing we are also going to cover in this video. In the future, if I make a video for leak testing for method as a person who is going in for level 3 in the leak detection, then we'll be talking about all of these details in much more detail. But in this video, we are just going to understand what are the requirements for leak detection, why it is required, and what are some common techniques that are used for leak detection. So again, as always, you have a general procedure requirement. So always you have to have a procedure before you can perform any kind of test. That procedure has to be qualified first. So once the procedure is qualified, then you can perform it. Again, the procedure will generally have a essential and a non-essential variable. Next is referencing code. For leak detection methods or techniques specified by the referencing code, the referencing code shall be consulted for the following items, that is personal qualification and certification, technique and calibration standards, extent of examination, acceptable test sensitivity or leakage rate. Now, the reason for test sensitivity is because multiple leak detection techniques will have multiple sensitivities associated with it. Generally, the bubble leak testing is going to be the least sensitive, okay? But it is good for virtually most of the leaks. But if you want to have a very high sensitivity for your leak detection system, then in that case, helium mass spectrometer is going to be one of the best techniques that will help you in achieving a better sensitivity or higher sensitivity for your leak detection systems. Reporting requirements and retention of records. Equipment, multiple equipments can be used. You can have gauges. Pressure gauges generally are used for pressure change test. So generally you will fill up a container with some kind of a pressure, and after a point of time you will check that how much pressure has been released out of this, and you will get the evidence of how much leakage has happened. For doing this, the gauges are to be calibrated first. When the dial indicating and recording pressure gauges are used in leak testing, they should be preferably have a dial graduated over a range of approximately double the intended maximum pressure, but in no case shall be less than 1.5 or more than 4 times of that pressure. These range limits do not apply to the dial indicating or a recording vacuum gauges. The range requirements for other types of gases given in an applicable mandatory appendix shall be required by that appendix. Next is cleanliness, opening, temperature range requirements. Then you have pressure vacuum or pressure limits. So unless specified by the mandatory appendix of this article or by the referencing code, the components that are to be pressure leak tested shall not be tested at a pressure exceeding than 25% of the design pressure requirement. Procedure, preliminary leak test, test sequence, calibration. Multiple calibrations can be done. You can have pressure vacuum gauges calibration, temperature measuring device calibration, calibration of a leak test standards. So generally you have a reservoir leak standards that is generally used for calibrating the leaks. Non-reservoir leak standards are also available. Finally, evaluation is done, and reportation. So whenever you are writing a report, these are the minimum things that are required as per the article 10 of ASME section 5. These are the minimum requirements. Obviously you'll have some additional requirements based on the applicable requirements, or depending on if your client requires some additional data, then also you'll be adding those. These are just the minimum requirements. The test report shall contain as a minimum the following information as applicable to the method or technique: the date of the test, certified level and the name of the operator, test procedure, procedure number and the revision, the latest revision, test methods or techniques, test results, component identification, test instrument, standard leak, material identification, test conditions, test pressure, tracer gas, gas concentration, gauges, gauges manufacturer, model, range and identification number, temperature measuring devices and identification number, and sketch showing method or technique setup. So all of these things are required. These are some general requirements. Obviously now we'll be starting with some mandatory appendixes. The mandatory appendix 1 and 2 are generally needed for ICP examination. Not all of the mandatory appendix are needed, so we'll talk about those only. For some additional, whenever we go for leak testing level 3 requirements, then we'll talk about all of these techniques. Okay. First is scope. The objective of the direct pressure technique of a bubble leak test is to locate the leaks in a pressurized component by application of a solution or immersing in a liquid that will form a bubble. So generally you'll have pretty much a good idea that how do they identify punctures in a tire. So they'll generally fill up a tire with some kind of an air, and they'll dip this in a punctured tire in some liquid, and in that liquid you'll see a bubble formation, and this will indicate where the leak is. Okay, the same requirement is done here. So general requirements, you'll have a written procedure. Written procedure will have these of the following things plus the things that were mentioned in article 10. So the requirements of T1021.1 and table 11021 and the following as specified in the article or the referencing code shall apply. Soak time, pressure gauge, test pressure and acceptance criteria. Procedure qualification also needs to be done. You have equipment, gases are initially used to fill the component. Then you have bubble solution, or you have immersion. So you'll be applying the bubble solution onto the surface, or you will directly immerse the part in the bubble solution or in a liquid solution. Next is soak time. Prior to the examination, the test pressure shall be held for minimum of 15 minutes. These are the requirements for bubble leak testing procedure. Surface temperature, application of a solution, immersion in a bath. Then finally, visual and lighting aids are required to view the bubbles. Then indication of a leakage, post-test cleaning, evaluation and repair and test. The same thing when you are going for mandatory appendix 2, it is a slight modification in the technique for bubble leak test, which is a vacuum box test. This is one kind of bubble leak test, but in these cases vacuum boxes are used. Again, you have scope, written procedure requirements, essential and non-essential variable for the procedures qualification, equipment as a bubble solution and a vacuum box. Okay, so vacuum box used shall be of a convenient size, so it's about this much. It should be example 6 inches wide and 30 inches long and contain a window in the side opposite to the open bottom. The open bottom edge shall be equipped with a suitable gasket to form a seal against the test surface. Suitable connections, valves, lightings and gauge shall be provided. The gauge shall have a range of 0 psi to 15 psi or equivalent pressure units such as 0 inch in Hg to 30 inches Hg. Hg is level of helium, level of mercury. The range limit requirements of T1031A do not apply here. Vacuum source. So required vacuum can be developed in the box by any convenient method, that is air ejector, vacuum pump or motor intake manifold. Test surface temperatures, application of solution, vacuum box placement, pressure retention, vacuum box overlap. Generally overlap shall be done so that no areas will be left uninspected. Lighting requirements, indication of a leakage. The presence of continuous bubble growth on the surface of the material or weld seam indicates the leakage through the orifice in the region under the examination. That's it. So these are just the two appendixes we have talked about for bubble leak test. These are the requirements that are given in API 653 and API 570. These are the general requirements for leak testing. And this is it for this video. In this video, we have talked about the general requirements for leak testing and only one technique, that is bubble leak test. In the next video, we'll be talking about some other non-destructive examination techniques that are required by API ICP examination and for ASNT Entity Level 3 basic examination and some method examinations. Okay, thank you. That's it for this video. We'll meet in the next video with some other method for non-destructive examination.